Hello, hello. Welcome back.
We are recording for
the Chili Grits podcast.
Yes, we're so excited to be here once again. And we're just having a great time, right, Aisha?
We are.
Yes. Okay, so I have to tell you, before we jump into our saying of the day.
Yes.
Jeff and I went to a restaurant that we will not name.
Okay.
It is north of the city.
Uh-huh.
And they serve not chili grits, shrimp and grits.
Yes. Was it good?
Oh my God.
No, it must not. If you're not going to name it, it must not have been good.
No, it was rough.
It was not representative.
The grits were like soup.
Oh no.
I've never had grits.
I don't like liquidy grits.
Yeah, it was a hot mess. So,
and not in a good way.
And not in a good way. So, all right, Northeast, we got to get it together.
Do a little better with the consistency.
Yeah, and so anybody that have attended this restaurant north of the city, let me know if you had the same experience with the runny shrimp and grits.
I've never ordered shrimp and grits here.
Really?
No.
Yeah, I've ordered it twice, and each time I've been disappointed, I have to say. All right, I digress, but be warned of the chili grits locally.
Exactly. Well, listen, I am Dr. Aisha Francis.
And I am Reverend Monica Bowman.
And we're here to talk about fun, uplifting sayings from our Southern heritage and backgrounds. I'm from Tennessee.
And I'm from Lake Charles, Louisiana.
And so today, the saying of the day is, treat them with a long-handled spoon.
Yes, a long-handled spoon. All right, I'm saying it right. The last time, Aisha was all on me. I was too proper.
Now treat them with a long-handled spoon.
Yes.
Just the EM, the M. Got to cut off some of the syllables in order to say it right. So
okay, so the spoon, the handle.
Yes.
What is the story behind the saying?
Okay, so as far as I have been able to research, and this particular saying is recorded in the USC Digital Folklore Archives with like a little bit of an explanation about what it means. And so, I grew up with this saying, and this is another one that was often shared in my household when I was presenting my mom, or not just necessarily with my mom, but anybody in the family with a conundrum. It could have been a he said, she said matter. It could have been, it's usually about like a personal conflict. So this is the way that the USC Digital Folklore Archives explains this particular saying. All right, which they actually take sayings and have first person interviews with folks who understand the sayings. And then it's almost like an oral history project.
Interesting.
And then they record for posterity what the saying means. So the informant was actually someone born and raised in Colorado. So this gets back to one of our conversations that we had about, what makes
truly
something
a Southern saying. Yes.
But she said it's a saying that she used off her life, and she called it a proverb that her grandmother taught her. Now, what we have to find out is where was her grandmother from? And her grandmother helped her by giving her these sayings. And so this is the quote. My grandma used to tell me, feed them with a long-handled spoon. When she said this, it was usually in regards to when I would have to fight with someone, or if one of my friends really hurt my feelings. And even every now and then in my profession, she will still use it if I don't necessarily like the person I'm working with. It means if someone does you wrong, you deal with them, you still are nice to them, but you never have to trust them again, and you don't have to let them get close to you. My grandma was real big on how people interact with you and how people interact with each other. And she thought that if someone was going to violate you and violate your trust, for you to keep going in front of them, for you to keep in front of them so that they could never stab you in the back again. Again, you're still nice to them, and you deal with them when you have to, but you don't have to trust them again or let them get close to you. Which, essentially,
that's it.
That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
That is it in a nutshell. And I thought it was so cool that this particular informant, like us, went from this is how the saying applied to my formative years, and this is how it still applies to my professional life.
It stuck.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's stuck. And it's transferable knowledge. You know, these kind of folk ways are transferable. And to me, they are just as valuable as, you know, the latest leadership concept from, you know, HBR or wherever. You know, there's just some
acronyms.
Harvard Business Review.
Very good.
Yes, Harvard Business Review or whatever source. Some things, at least that I'm drawing from, are what I feel have come to be common sense, but there are these principles that I know in my gut. So
yeah, you know, it's what I appreciate about the saying that makes it nuanced and complex is, I've said this in another episode, is how these sayings then interact with society and your ability to be able to execute on it, right? Yeah. So, you know, I think about the ability to then be able to, underneath it is set a boundary, right? And I think about it from the kind of communal theological framework that I grew up with, where forgiveness is always preached, right? It's like you forgive, you know, and then sometimes the definition of what happens after forgiveness is undefined or is defined in a very maybe gracious way in which you still allow other people or the people that cause you harm to still be a part of your life and be present, because that for some people is what grace and love and being faithful and demonstrating your faith look like. I've never been one to think that. Let's be very clear. That's not my theology. You can
cut somebody out real quick.
Oh, I can cut.
and I will not speak.
No,
with
we're
you
not
again,
doing that.
Right?
Yeah, that's a wrap. And it's an area of growth for me, I have to say. But, you know, in a professional context, you can't just cut somebody off.
There you go.
Like, you just can't, because you can't do that.
Yeah.
You have
the world is too small.
It's too small. And it's how do you give yourself space and grace for yourself to understand what is a relationship that you are still willing to work on, even when it's difficult, versus the wooden spoon, you know, because in our personal lives, we have that liberty, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, I choose to want to work on things with my spouse. I choose to want to work on things with my children. Whew, sometimes it's a struggle. But what else am I do? I'm gonna work it out with my children.
Right.
But in public spaces where you don't have that type of intimacy, sometimes your willingness to want to put in the work isn't there. And so in a professional sense, you have to figure out, even when things go awry, is this interaction, is this person worth my time to reconcile a relationship, or should I always treat this person, this institution, from a distance? Does an institution and a person in a business context, is there room for growth and evolution in those types of situations?
Yes, and I think that is it's an evolving strategic choice in the professional context, and it depends on how much bandwidth you have individually, what the risk is of distancing yourself from the institution or the individual. You know, what is the institutional risk? Sometimes it could be a personal professional risk. Sometimes there can be an institutional risk to the organization that you represent. But I also want to go back to a couple of related sayings that this brings up. So one is this kind of sister saying for this is my great grandmother would say, "Love them from a distance." And she would really say that in the way I've seen that used around situations where there had already been a determination made. Listen, forgiveness has already been accessed, and full reparations is not accessed. So this is a person, we are related to this person, or we are deeply connected to them in a familial way. it's not practical for them to go away, or a church member. We are going to keep going to this church. Nobody's going to run us out from a church.
Yep.
Because people do leave churches for these kinds of reasons.
All types
people
of drama
leave all the time, right?
Yeah,
There's 1,000.
absolutely.
There's churches on every corner.
Yeah, and they split.
They split all the time.
Because of the inability to manage conflict.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So, there's high stakes, right? I think for trying to find the ties that bind. And there were definitely moments when it's like, look, that's a person you have to love from a distance. Now, I've already told you this. And so if you choose to get close to them, right? If you choose to get close to the fire, when I have mentioned to you before and I've shown you, so you can choose to follow my example, or you can go out there on your own, but just know, I love them from a distance. I would suggest that you do the same, but ultimately it's your decision. And then this whole piece with a food culture, earlier you and I were talking about, I don't even know, a lot of people don't even cook anymore. So does all of this, a lot of the sayings that are related to food culture, do they even resonate with people? But, just in case, the whole idea of treating somebody with a long-handled spoon, and we would say treat. I recognize that it's also feed.
Yes,
it's like that game of telephone.
Yeah.
I grew up saying treat them with a long-handled spoon because the analogy had moved from the context of food to how you treat somebody relationally. Yeah. But feed them with the long-handled spoon is different. So the way that I was, taught, it was really about how you cook. And so you use a long-handled spoon when you're cooking soups or something that's going to pop back, perhaps. And so it keeps you, a safe distance from the food. Feeding someone with a long-handled spoon, to me, that's a whole different awkward thing, because the whole process of feeding a child and a kid is an intimate exchange. So it really does change, I think, a little bit of the perspective and the point. But I just wanted to at least lift up Love 'Em Like a Distance, and this other one that rappers, and now I'm going to sound like an old person, like rappers whose names I can't remember, made famous by using this clip from Bush. But, there is this fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
Yes.
And I think that's the other piece, the other perspective that treating with a long-handled spoon involves for me, which is you are doing that based on lived experience or somebody else's lived experience. It's not for no reason.
Yes. And I'm about to sound like an old person right now, because I think about moments when I was in leadership here in Cambridge, and we had all of these explosive moments. I'm pretty sure you remember some of them. It's just like, oh, Cambridge, sometimes you just can't get out of your own way. But we had all of these explosive moments, and a lot of them were with the young people, and they would come to our school committee, school board meetings, and it was like very rigid, and I get it because I was once an organizer and I understand the methodology to be able to push an institution. And there's definitely a place for that. I'm all about advocacy, lifting up voice. And I'm also about being strategic around how you do it, right? And so this feed 'em with a long-handed spoon analogy really ties into that, because at some point, the places that you advocate in, they're still your neighbor.
Yes.
You're still a part of community, right? This is not like going up to Washington, D.C. and putting your demands in, or even better yet, Beacon Hill, where we are here in Massachusetts, where most of the people there live across the state. You don't have to interact with them, right?
Right.
But here, when you're advocating at a very local level, really understanding this concept of like, okay, like I can still advocate for the things that I want to, and I still have to figure out a way to be present with these people because they're my neighbor.
Right.
They're my teacher. This is my auntie. This is my cousin. Oh, this person works with my mom. Like,
right.
And so I think that that's the one piece that I see that is not nuanced when we're working in community at the uber local level, to be able to explain or teach or train ourselves as adults, but even young people, how to understand the nuances when you're pushing and advocating for something.
Yes, I think that's a really good point that you bring up. And this is, how do we learn to disagree without being disagreeable?
Yeah.
Or just agree to disagree. And I do think that there is currency in treating with a long handled spoon for that being an avenue.
Yeah.
Yes, you can acknowledge people's presence, whether you want to call it cordial or not. We don't have to put people on permanent mute. And
Yes.
we live in this moment of cancel culture. And I do think that there are, it is possible for a pendulum to swing too much in the direction of lack of ability to redeem oneself.
Yes.
And inability to ever sit down at the table together again. Mm-hmm. And perhaps there's space for that. There are things that are egregious, injury, injurious harm that people, might have caused on purpose,
yes,
or unintentionally. And I make space for all of that. And I also think that, we've talked sometimes about self-preservation. For the greater purpose of self-preservation, I respectfully reserve the right to treat folks with a long-handled spoon.
For my own mental health, right?
Yes,
yeah.
And just, for again, in the context of leadership, for advancement, we can't carry every single institutional relationship forward. And that happens often. There's an ebb and a flow to relationships, and we have to, I think, remember that, and also understand how to manage in a way that allows us to reconsider and perhaps to go back. And I think that's what I like about this particular, philosophy, way of living, is, to love someone from a distance, to treat them with a long-handled spoon. It does at least leave the possibility that there could be a repair. Right?
Yeah. And, it's interesting, in the many hats that I wear, when you're an elected leader or you are a pastor, whenever you execute that type of philosophy or approach, when you have to interact with someone that has crossed the boundary, mm-hmm. It's viewed as jarring, right? Because the expectation is your elected leader is supposed to take whatever you throw at them, and because they signed up for it and they're there to serve, right? Mm-hmm. It's the same way for individuals that are pastors or rabbis or imams. Like, it's this expectation that you are to be the embodiment of whatever your faith is in human form, despite the fact that you are a human. You know? And so it's been interesting for me because I've had the privilege to swing back and forth between leadership roles where, in the secular space, I can be like, yeah, I'm not doing that, and mm-hmm. I do it in the most gracious and respectful way possible. I'm not trying to rip anybody down. But it's been more challenging for me to execute that in the public space, mm-hmm. as well as being a pastor. And when I did do it, people couldn't handle it.
The pushback.
It was just mm-hmm. remarkable. It was like, how dare you? And I think some of that has to do with being a woman, mm-hmm. And being a woman of color, mm-hmm. and walking in your authority and your voice and being firm in it. But I do see how, depending on your context, allows you to be able to execute on that.
I think so. Yeah, I think there's a lot of variation on the theme, and it is imperative, though, I think, to allow people to have the room to distance themselves from situations, institutions, organizations that are not serving their institutional best interest if they represent one of their personal best interests. I do think that to the extent that we give special privileges to sectors or individuals or something, it's like, well, no matter what they do, you still have to engage with them. That emboldens or provides opportunity for bad actors to be emboldened. And I think that's a dangerous precedent if there are any kind of, again, any individual that has a habit or a history of injury, but still feels it doesn't matter. Whatever I do, I'm going to be protected.
Yeah.
That's a dangerous place to be. So, I can only imagine ways that folks are trying to evade and avoid encounters, either at a very, interpersonal level, whether it's in a household and someone's been violated. How do you protect yourself? How do you love somebody from a distance? How do you treat somebody with a long-handled spoon when they're in your household?
Yeah.
How do you...
That's true.
And,
yeah.
The same thing similarly for the workplace. It's complicated. It's very complicated. So anyhow, that's our saying for the day.
Yeah. Can I add one more thing to this,
Absolutely.
Aisha? So it's interesting because I think there's a level of privilege that's wrapped up in this whole conversation, right? The privilege to be able to remove yourself from a situation.
Yeah.
People that have means and resources. A lot of times, I listen to a lot of thought pieces and podcasts and things like that. And in the professional world, a lot of times people say, oh, as soon as I don't want to wake up on Sunday, when I get the Sunday blues, I'm out, I'm leaving. Or if working isn't a passion, then you're not really living into your full potential. And I think sometimes that's the wrong message to send people. I think that what we're talking about with treat them with a long handle spoon or wooden spoon is a better approach, because for those individuals that just do not have the ability to up and leave their jobs, right? Or people that live in parts of the world where their economies are not as robust as a developed nation, you can't just wake up and be like, oh my gosh, I'm not satisfied in my workplace.
Right. So I'm out.
I'm out. Like, it's just not realistic. But for those people that have those privileges, good for them, right? But I think sometimes the narrative gets set with those individuals and not with everyday folks like us.
Yeah.
That's like
true.
We're trying to establish ourselves. We are, and we're established, but we're not at the place where our podcast is syndicated everywhere. We're not
keep speaking it into existence, right? Call those things
right.
to be not as they are.
Right.
So yes, I hear all of that, and I think that I'm reading Black Cake right now. I'm finishing up by Charmaine Wilkinson, and it's a story of Jamaican heritage and lineage, and there are lots of uncomfortable things that the main character, I would say the eldest protagonist, because there are lots of protagonists, but the eldest protagonist goes through, and one of the ways that she and many other protagonists in kind of the Africana literature manage is through interiority, retreating to interiority, right?
Yeah.
So these things are happening around you. You cannot leave because you need to support yourself, or because you and your culture values familial ties.
Yes.
And to be independent of family is literally to be abandoned, right?
Yes.
And yet there are ways to protect yourself by, retreating into oneself, stealing oneself. So, there's a lot of things. This is what it's like, I wish, having the input of psychiatry and psychology and those kinds of things, I think has a lot to do with this. And, I'm not prepared to go there and not trained in that way. But I do think our minds have we have the capacity to adapt in some really incredible ways.
Absolutely.
Even when we are in less than ideal circumstances and situations.
Absolutely. And quite frankly, that is the African American story.
Yes, that's true.
That is our story, right? And I get that we have evolved as a people, as experiences, and so we're able to explore different concepts, right, of
Right.
how to exist in the world. But it goes back to the saying, this was like one of those elementary fundamental things to help people get by in their day-to-day lives.
In their relational lives.
Right.
Yeah.
When segregation was still a thing.
Right.
And they still figured out a way to evolve and advance as a people. And I think that aspect is, I think that it's lost a little bit sometimes. Like those just basic fundamental skills that were passed down with, at least within an African American context, because we came here with nothing and enslaved.
Right.
In some type of way, from a psychological perspective, which I am not a psychiatrist as well, but from a social perspective, we were able to leverage moments or go within ourselves to preserve our mental sanity in a way that then allowed us to pass it down generation to generation to generation. And now you and I are sitting at this desk in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
The survivors.
Yeah, having a podcast.
And that is what we came with, right? We came with strategies. We came with we did come with our culture, right? We came with seeds and material knowledge and how to, and a lot of things that, we, to the extent that we don't realize they've been passed down, I think it's important to pass it out, to point it out.
Yes.
And then in other ways where we might have lost those folk traditions, I think it is important to reclaim them. And so there's a whole movement of reclamation of folk traditions, folk ways, and even the trades. Honestly, we were skilled labor.
We were.
And so to divorce us from access to skilled labor and paid work in the ways that we built this country materially is, a travesty. And so anyway, now we're off on a whole other thing, which, but I think it's a continuing conversation. It does.
Right?
It does all connect.
It all connects because it goes back to what you said. It goes back to the saying of being able to treat a situation or people with that long wooden spoon. It's about your mental, psychological survival when a situation is complex and it makes you feel uncomfortable.
Oh, yes. And when you have the experiential knowledge that the last time this happened, there were some horrible outcomes.
Yes.
It's not just because. It is because of a lived experience. The soup popped back and I was burned.
Yeah. And who wants to be burned?
Who wants to be burned?
Nobody.
Yeah. The fire popped and I was singed. I was scorched. I'm trying to protect myself and my loved ones. So for all of you out there who are looking for, a philosophy of life about, avoidance and protection, treat them with a long-handled spoon.
Yes. And remember that we have the capability, even in the toughest circumstances and situations, to be victorious, to overcome them, and this deep-rooted history and the sayings that we explore week after week, I think it's a testament to that.
I do too. What is that saying? They tried to bury us if they didn't realize we were seeds.
That's right.
Yeah,
and we just keep
that's a good
growing.
one.
Yeah.
That's a wrap.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking your time, whether you're on like a treadmill or your commute into work or wherever, however you're listening to Chili Grits podcast. We are just excited and hope you're just as excited to explore all of these things. And of course, if you have one, let us know.
Yes, keep sending them in. I hope if you've been listening to the prior episodes, you'll see we have been shouting out folks who have made special requests for particular sayings. And so we're all about the communal experience here.
Indeed. So until next time, see you later. Bye.
Bye.